The sun rose over the Sinai Peninsula, casting long shadows across the desert. October 6, 1973 dawned like any other Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. It was a day for reflection, for prayer, and for atonement. Little did anyone know this sacred day would be forever etched in history, not for its solemnity, but for the eruption of a conflict that would reshape the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The Yom Kippur War had begun. Across the Suez Canal, massed Egyptian forces stood poised, their eyes fixed on the eastern bank. In the north, on the rocky slopes of the Golan Heights, Syrian tanks rumbled, their guns pointed towards the Israeli lines. The element of surprise was paramount. The Arabs, stinging from their defeat in the Six-Day War of 1967, had meticulously planned this offensive. Their objective to reclaim the territories lost in that earlier conflict, to restore Arab pride, and to rewrite the narrative of history. The air crackled with tension. Then, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, the silence was shattered. Egyptian artillery opened fire, raining down shells on the Israeli positions along the Bar Lev line, a seemingly impregnable network of fortifications that snaked along the eastern bank of the Suez Canal. Simultaneously, Syrian tanks and infantry stormed across the Golan Heights, catching the outnumbered Israeli defenders off guard. The Yom Kippur War, a conflict that would test the mettle of both sides, had begun in a fury of fire and steel. The Sinai Peninsula, a vast expanse of sand and rock, became a cauldron of conflict. Egyptian troops, their morale buoyed by the initial success of their surprise attack, surged across the Suez Canal, bridging the waterway with pontoon bridges and launching wave after wave of assaults against the Bar Lev line. The desert air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite and the roar of tank engines. The Israeli defenders, though caught off guard, fought with tenacity, determined to hold their ground against the onslaught. They knew that the fate of their nation hung in the balance. Every inch of sand, every rocky outcrop became a battleground. Tanks dueled amidst the dunes, their guns flashing. Fighter jets screamed overhead, locked in deadly aerial combat. The Egyptians, under the command of Anwar Sadat, were fighting not just for territory, but for dignity. The humiliation of the Six-Day War still burned brightly in their collective memory. They were determined to prove their strength, to erase the stain of defeat. The soldiers, many of them hardened veterans of previous conflicts with Israel, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a yearning for redemption. High above the Sinai, on the strategic plateau of the Golan Heights, another drama unfolded. Syrian tanks, spearheaded by elite armored units, stormed across the ceasefire lines, their guns blazing. The Golan, captured by Israel in 1967, held immense strategic importance, overlooking the fertile Hula Valley and offering a commanding view of northern Israel. Its recapture was a key objective for the Syrians. The Israeli defenders on the Golan, vastly outnumbered but determined, fought with the courage of lions. They knew that the loss of the Golan Heights would be a devastating blow to Israel's security. They manned their positions with grim determination, their fingers on the triggers of their guns, their eyes scanning the horizon for the enemy. The Syrian soldiers, driven by a dream of reclaiming lost land, fought with equal fervor. They had tasted defeat in 1967, and they were determined not to taste it again. The Golan for them represented more than just a strategic asset. It was a symbol of their nation's pride, and they were willing to pay any price to reclaim it. The Egyptian advance across the Suez Canal, though initially successful, soon encountered stiffening Israeli resistance. The Bar Lev line, though breached in several places, had not crumbled as expected. The Israelis, masters of mobile warfare, launched a series of counterattacks, hitting the Egyptians hard and slowing their momentum. But the Egyptians had a surprise in store, a daring plan that would catch the Israelis completely off guard. They had studied the Israeli defenses meticulously, identifying a potential weak point. Instead of focusing their efforts on frontal assaults against the heavily fortified Bar Lev line, they would launch a flanking attack, bypassing the main Israeli defenses and striking deep into the Sinai. This audacious maneuver, codenamed Operation Badr, Full Moon, involved moving a large force of tanks and infantry across a narrow strip of land between the Great Bitter Lake and the Mitla Pass. The Israelis, convinced that the Egyptians would not attempt such a risky move, had left this area lightly defended. But if successful, it would outflank the Bar-Lev line and open the door for a deep thrust into the Sinai. Section 5. The Golan, where valor met steel. On the Golan Heights, the fighting raged with even greater intensity. The Syrians, their numbers bolstered by reinforcements from Jordan and Iraq, pressed their attack relentlessly. The Israelis, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves. They knew that their survival depended on holding the Golan. The battles on the Golan were some of the most brutal of the entire war. Tanks clashed in close-quarters combat, their guns roaring, their armor-piercing rounds ripping through steel. Infantrymen fought hand-to-hand amidst the rocks and scrub, their rifles cracking, their bayonets flashing. The air was thick with the stench of cordite and the coppery tang of blood. Despite their numerical inferiority, the Israelis fought with a skill and determination that surprised their enemies. They were masters of defensive warfare, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They fought from prepared positions, their tanks dug in on the reverse slopes of hills, their guns sighted on likely enemy avenues of approach. Section 6. Turning the Tide, a Testament to Willpower. As the days turned into nights, the tide of battle began to turn. The Israelis, their initial shock overcome, rallied with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. They launched a series of counteroffensives, pushing back the Syrians on the Golan and threatening to cut off the Egyptian forces that had crossed the Suez Canal. The turning point on the Golan came in a series of desperate battles that tested the limits of human endurance. Outnumbered and outgunned, the Israeli defenders fought with a tenacity that bordered on the superhuman. They repelled wave after wave of Syrian attacks, their guns glowing red-hot from constant firing. The Israelis also benefited from their superior air power. Israeli fighter jets, operating from air bases in the Negev desert, flew hundreds of sorties a day, attacking Egyptian and Syrian tank columns, artillery positions, and supply lines. The air war was a crucial factor in turning the tide of the conflict in Israel's favor. Section 7. A World on Edge. The Yom Kippur War sent shockwaves throughout the world. The Cold War superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, were drawn into the conflict, each supplying their respective allies with weapons and military aid. The world watched with bated breath, fearful that the conflict could escalate into a wider war. The Arab oil-producing nations, angered by the West's support for Israel, imposed an oil embargo, sending oil prices skyrocketing and triggering a global energy crisis. The embargo had a profound impact on the global economy, highlighting the West's dependence on Middle Eastern oil. The war also had a profound impact on the Middle East peace process. The initial Arab successes shattered the myth of Israeli invincibility, forcing the Israelis to reconsider their strategic position. The war paved the way for the Camp David Accords in 1978, which led to a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Section 8. Ceasefire, the guns fall silent, but the echoes remain. After 3 weeks of intense fighting, a ceasefire was finally negotiated, bringing the Yom Kippur War to an end. The war had exacted a heavy toll on both sides. Thousands of soldiers lay dead on the battlefields, and countless civilians had been displaced from their homes. The ceasefire lines, patrolled by United Nations peacekeeping forces, largely reflected the pre-war borders. Israel had survived, but its sense of invincibility had been shattered. The Arab world, though defeated militarily, had regained a sense of pride. The Yom Kippur War marked a turning point in the Arab-Israeli conflict. It demonstrated that the Arabs, though still militarily inferior to Israel, were capable of launching a surprise attack and inflicting heavy casualties. The war also had a profound impact on the political landscape of the Middle East, leading to the Camp David Accords and the eventual peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. Section 9. The Yom Kippur War Legacy of Courage, Price of Peace. The Yom Kippur War stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict. It was a war fought with courage and determination on both sides, a war that left an indelible mark on all who fought in it. The war also highlighted the volatility of the Middle East, a region riven by religious and political divisions. The war's legacy is complex and multifaceted. It led to a reassessment of Israeli military doctrine, a renewed focus on diplomacy, and the eventual peace treaty with Egypt. It also underscored the importance of dialogue and understanding in a region where conflict has been all too common. The Yom Kippur War, though fought over 40 years, long shadow over the Middle East. It serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most intractable conflicts can be resolved through diplomacy and a willingness to compromise. It is a legacy that we must never forget, a reminder that peace, though elusive, is the only path to a brighter future.